Joining me now for another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show with an emotional night set to happen on Saturday when the Toronto Raptors come to New York to take on the New York Knicks. The return of, you know what? I almost said Obi Toppin, which almost happened this week, of RJ Barrett and Immanuel Quickley to Madison Square Garden. We need to go to the number one source of Toronto Raptors information that anybody would be lucky to get their information from. And it's Mr. S. Baraheni. Welcome back to the show, sir. And I must say, to the Knicks fans that I know have reached out to me to say he was a great guest. We love following him. I'm envious that you get to watch IQ 35 minutes a night and this new version of RJ Barrett. That's good now. So, first of all, how are you doing, sir?
I am good. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for having me on as always. I love jumping on this podcast. So I love talking Knicks basketball also. And that's, a pastime now with OG being on the team. You always have that second computer out watching OG and the Knicks do their thing. And so it's been good, man. It's been good so far. The RJ Barrett experience has also been very good so far. I'm sure we'll get into it, but yeah, thank you for having me, man.
Well, we'll get into it, the specifics in a second. It is amazing that you just said the second screen of it all, because I speak for so many Knicks fans that this season has become a mandatory two-screen experience, that no matter who the Knicks are playing, what's going on in the game. I've had people be like, I'm watching your post game and then this West Coast trip that the Raptors went on. I also need to make sure, like, I was invested in them getting robbed by the refs during the Laker game. Like, Darko's half my coach too, and he's speaking for me. Okay. Well, amazing what's happened to this season after these two teams were in civil court before the season started. So how the Raptors have become like must-watch TV as far as Knicks fans with League Pass. I guess I'll get somewhat of a vibe check from you on what's going on in Toronto. And we don't even need to start with the OG Anunoby, RJ Barrett, Immanuel Quickley of it all, but another trade was just made by the Raptors more recently. Your thoughts, or I guess your reaction in the moment when Pascal Siakam was traded?
It's been a whirlwind of a month, man, because even if you go back to like Fred leaving in free agency, it's been a really weird transitional phase for these Raptors teams. It's just so much uncertainty. You have Fred leave in free agency, obviously one of the pillars of that championship team. Then you have OG leave, get traded to New York just 3 or 4 weeks ago. And now the Pascal trade, which is just like the death knell to an era of Raptors basketball. So it's not only you're saying bye to these guys, but you're also looking back on an entire, the last time the Raptors were bad at basketball, and like truthfully bad, like there was no hope of them getting anywhere. It was like 2012, right? Allen Anderson hooping for them and whatnot. And I was 16, 17, I'm now a 28-year-old man, and it's been a very long time. So I guess that sort of like cathartic feeling of looking back on this last, 10 years of Raptors basketball, Kyle, DeMar, Kawhi, Pascal, Fred, you can keep going, Serge, all these guys, right? They're all gone. And when you look at it, DeMar DeRozan was facing the Raptors last night. The Chicago Bulls came into town, and DeMar didn't have anybody to like chop it up with on the other side. And that's weird. It usually is, he goes and says hi to Pascal, or he says hi to Fred or OG or whoever. And there's nothing left other than Chris Boucher. Shout out to Chris Boucher. But there's nothing left from that era. It's a completely new slate. They're headed into a new direction, and there's uncertainty with that. There's the unknown, which is like you have this pit in your stomach. You don't know what's going to happen next, but it's also a sad feeling, just seeing it's over for a lot of these fans, right?
Yeah. So I personally have never had one of my teams in the Rangers in '94 won the Stanley Cup, but none of my teams have won a title. So I've never had to see that team be stripped down in any way, shape, or form. I know some Yankee fans in my life have seen like obviously multiple championships, but then like the letting go of some of these players that were part of it was an emotional experience. So I enjoy hearing your perspective, or I guess appreciate hearing your perspective on the last remnants of that team that won the title. Yeah. Now officially, other than Chris Boucher, we got to honor that no longer being there. I will say what it seems to have created with the Raptors. They're 16-26 on the season at the moment. They're 4-6 since the trade, and the vibes just seem incredible. They seem amazing at the moment. And it's like 2 years ago, the Knicks, they went through this rough stretch in the middle of the season. They were 3-17 at one point in that stretch. And we were just begging Tibbs, like, let go of the rope, like front office, tell him he's safe, play Quickley as a starter, like shut Julius down. He's been bad to unplayable at points. Let's see what this Obi Toppin thing is. Let's get an evaluation of some of these young kids with no expectations. And it didn't happen until 11 games left in the season. They shut Julius down, and it was 11 games of bliss, of like Obi playing a ton that didn't matter. They weren't going to make the playoffs. Yeah. Quickley wasn't starting, but he was still coming off the bench and getting a ton of minutes. And it was just like, you know what? We don't care what the score is. We just want to see these kids play. And wouldn't you know it, they outperformed what they were doing in these limited roles.
Right.
And you seem to be having that every night now, is that experience of no expectations. It's just seeing what you got in RJ, see what you got in Quickley. And am I describing that correctly? That it's
you definitely are. Yeah.
The wins and losses are kind of secondary at this point. We're seeing what a young team that doesn't necessarily need to, like last night, that they came back late in the fourth quarter against the Bulls, made it a close game. Is that the experience right now going on in Toronto?
Absolutely. And you have this, it's like this weird feeling of you have no idea what this next little bit holds, other than knowing like Scotty Barnes is part of the future, RJ Barrett is part of the future, Immanuel Quickley is part of the future, but there's still 3 weeks left until the deadline. And so you're like, who else is going to go in this scenario? And so we're still a little bit in that transition phase. It's like, okay, our team's going to trade for Chris Boucher or Gary Trent Jr. or Jakob Poeltl or whoever, right? And so it hasn't set in fully, but the vibes are incredible. The fact that they're like, it's this young team that is always feisty. You talk about like the Clippers game from last week, where without Pascal, without Jakob Poeltl, they kind of fought tooth and nail to go back and forth against like one of the best teams in the NBA. That Lakers game where they went back and forth too. There's just been a lot of fun games, and that could not be said about the Raptors from October to December. That just wasn't the case. Even from last year, that wasn't the case. And so you have this like fun, feisty young team that is trying to figure things out. There's a bunch of new guys who are trying to like develop camaraderie and chemistry together on the go. And I guess it's exciting from that perspective. You also wonder, and maybe this is something you can shed light on. It's like you're starting a reset, right? And you're starting a rebuild. And so there's that level of maybe fear that this could take longer than you think it will. You know, you look at the Detroits of the world, you look at the Orlandos of the world. It took them a while to kind of get themselves out of this rut, right? Even in Detroit, they're still in that rut. So I don't know. I think that's in the back of people's minds. And even Masai Ujiri yesterday was like, hey, like this thing could take 6-7 years. This thing could take 3 or 5 years. We don't know, but the reset has happened and we need you guys to stay patient. And so that part to me is different than what we've had to deal with over the last 10 years, you know?
Is assuming that a Knicks fan would be able to speak on this because of how many rebuilds we've gone through over the last 2 decades.
Absolutely. I think you are a great example of this, you know, no, in all honesty, you know what I mean? It just,
so, I mean, to your point, I think the key here, and this is where I have to turn it back onto you, is do you trust who's in charge? Because the Knicks' incompetence over the last 2 decades coincides with Scott Layden and Isaiah Thomas and Phil Jackson and Steve Mills and just flat out guys that just didn't know what they were doing when they were in charge of the organization. Now there's a Dolan factor to all of that and an urgency. Like they're just not allowed to tank, and you got to put on a show on Broadway. And I know there's another Dolan thing going on that we're just not going to talk about today. But the point is, like, I trust who's in charge now with the Knicks. Like I trust Leon Rose and their ability to, if they like 2 years ago when they had that down season, I still had like a baseline trust. They tried something with Kemba Walker. It didn't work. He was gone by the deadline. They tried something with Evan Fournier. They tried it for a year, and 12 games into the following season, he was out of the rotation and really hasn't been back since.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of the steps that they've taken since then have all been positive steps forward. And I think if you have that same trust in Masai, that he built it once, he has torn it down. I think smartly. There's letting Fred walk, letting Kyle walk is a choice. But like as far as this year and the trades that they've made, like getting players back in one that can be part of your rebuild, and then getting picks back in another, so that way they can be assets in the future, I think has been well. Do you trust Masai to have torn it down and be able to rebuild it back up again?
So it's interesting because Masai has never torn it down anywhere he's been a GM, even with Denver and the Melo trade, which you will remember very fondly. Or not fondly, I'm not sure. I don't know, but I wonder,
am I fond of Carmelo Anthony? Yes,
I didn't see that there. Oh yeah, yes. So yeah, I mean, like that. Even that trade catapulted Denver back into the playoff race almost immediately with like guys like Wilson Chandler and all that. Like they figured it out through a different route. It wasn't really a full blown reset. In Toronto, there were plans initially to do that. Like when he first got here, he wanted to trade Kyle Lowry. He wanted to maybe move from DeMar DeRozan and like start over. And that didn't happen. They found a way to do things. And, the next 10 years happened. This is somewhat uncharted territory for Masai, building from the so on so forth bottom. But he does have a good foundation to build off of. Now, to be fair, I'd be lying to you if I said some of the mistakes and, shakiness over the last 4 or 5 years hasn't built a level of, I don't know, not even distrust. Distrust would be too strong, but just like questioning what is next and how they're supposed to maneuver. Because to your point, yes, they did as good as they could given the circumstances around OG and around Pascal. But if they did these trades last year, they without a doubt would have gotten more. If they traded Pascal 2 years ago, they without a doubt would have gotten more. And so there's like these little things. It's like missing on the Malachi Flynn pick and, draft all respect to
Evil
Knicks
Donte.
Legend, all respect to Knicks legend Malachi Flynn.
Evil Donte. Yeah.
and there's this level of like, okay, signing Aaron Baines and that doesn't work out. There's like these little marginal things that the Raptors used to nail, right? And they haven't nailed over these last 4 or 5 years, which is brought into question if the leadership is really as solid as it was beforehand. Now, to be fair, yesterday, Masai had a really like emotional press conference. It was over an hour long. I was sitting in there and you could feel the tension and emotion with what he was saying. And so you kind of want to shoot him bail because he obviously has an incredible track record and maybe one of the best executives of all time in basketball. So you trust it. You trust the process. There's this really big thing among Raptors Twitter, which is like trust Masai. That's still there, but now it's a new scenario, uncharted territory. You're heading into something new, and there's uncertainty.
Yeah, and the uncharted territory, I think, is why this is going to be something new and a different experience for the Raptors fans that you're referring to. And man, outside of the Scotty Barnes, you really have to commend them that this is more than a decade that you've really had to even think about like a legitimate rebuild in Toronto. So, I mean, look, we hope to get there one day here in New York.
I think
we're hopefully trending in that direction,
I said this as soon, I promise you there's receipts. You can go and look at the videos on SDPN. I made a video comparing Kyle Lowry and Jalen Brunson, and just the comparison was mostly like this guy who came into this organization and a lot of people said they were overrated or overhyped or not good enough. And every single year drives their team to the playoffs. Every single year brings consistency to the team. Every single year you have them in conversation for all-stars and all-NBAs. The fact that you have a player like Jalen Brunson, in my opinion, is your foundation to have that 10-year run, that consistency. And, hopefully, maybe at some point, ladies and gentlemen, an NBA championship. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, they even more accurate comp is if Julius Randle, with respect, DeMar DeRozan is your DeMar DeRozan, and you potentially move him one day for
there's a lot of weird parallels actually.
Yeah,
it's kind of strange, but yes, I agree.
Well, stylistically, I like the comp. I will say that I do like the Brunson to Lowry, like the base level of competence that you're getting with him, and the base level of competition that you're getting with both of these players. Stylistically, they're a little different, and I think this is where we dive into the X's and O's a little bit of what's working in Toronto.
Yeah.
And RJ Barrett is off to an outstanding start. I brought up the effective field goal percentage he had with the Knicks this season, that it was as low after that 9-game compound V version of him that existed. Then he became like last year Kobe. And since going to Toronto, he's taken extra compound V, and he's got a 60 effective field goal percentage at the moment. Some things that have stood out: it's his highest field goal percentage, but it's also his lowest field goal attempts per game since his rookie season. It's a 39% from three, but it's also his fewest 3-point attempts since the second year in the league, when he was just relegated to corners and was outstanding at them. And like, he's averaging his most assists a game for his career in Toronto. It's his most rebounds per game in Toronto. I also know Jakob Poeltl's been out for a little bit, and they've been going 5 out. And this is what RJ thrived on in FIBA. It was like the rim's wide open was his comment at one point. So stylistically, are the Raptors doing things different that are catering to RJ's strengths, or just from the outside looking in as a Knicks fan, is RJ going through one of those stretches where he makes you believe, and it's only 9 games? What would you, only 10 games? What would you say is the medium take in all of that?
I honestly wish you could answer that question, because I mean, I don't know either. I wrote an article on Forbes about this where I'm like, RJ Barrett is playing the best basketball maybe of his career. And
I read it, and I felt like I was James Franco in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Being like, first time.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
What's funny is the next night was the
dud.
The Jazz game where he was awful,
Yeah, I know. And I don't know what to make of it, because it's been like 8 games, 9 games now, and he's been incredible. But he's had 9, like you said, he had a 9-game stretch to start this season. He's had 9-game stretches before. He's had 20-game stretches before where he's put together really good basketball. He was great in the playoffs last year for you guys. Like, we've seen a level of RJ Barrett. The couple of things I'll say that are different, like tangibly, the Raptors are much more of a transition team. They are like going to emphasize fast break points. And RJ, even before he came to Toronto, was one of the best transition players in the NBA. So like, he could get there so much more often now in Toronto because they emphasize it more. So transition, he's killing it. They're running it more often. They're pushing it in transition more. It's helping him get easy points. The other thing is, I think they're emphasizing actions which allow him to get downhill momentum before he catches the ball. And that's the biggest thing I've noticed. I'm not sure if that was not the case in New York, because I do think in some instances he did have that, but they're having him curl to the basket, get downhill, and then as a cutter, being used as a guy who catches the ball on the go, finishes. He has that momentum, because one of those things is like, RJ doesn't necessarily have the quickest first step. He doesn't necessarily have like that burst to the rim type of ability. But if he's without the ball and he's running, he's still a quick enough guy to where and a strong enough guy to where if he catches the ball on the go, he can kind of bully his way to a drive and finish. And that's where he's absolutely thriving. His drives, I think he's shooting 20% better on his drives compared to when he was in New York, which is just like a staggering number. And he's doing it at the same attempt rate when it comes to field goals. So it's like, a lot of this feels sustainable. I don't know about the 3-point shooting, which started off really hot. It's sort of cooled down now. And I'm kind of curious to see where the playmaking falls, because they are putting they are putting the ball in his hands more, especially with second units. They're like, go be our facilitator. I am curious to see how long this sticks, though, the finishing and the rim finishing, because I just know so much about RJ and the stretches that he goes through that I'm expecting it in the back of my head for there to be some sort of downfall. But so far, it's been incredible, dude. Like, he has been playing perfect basketball, and I don't know what to make of it, man. I really don't know what to make of it.
again, it's these stretches that make you believe. And it's like, oh, this is why he was taken third overall. And like you bring up the cutting and using him in that way. The Knicks mostly ran these pistol sets, and it would get him going downhill. But like you said, on the dribble, and they'd use a Hartenstein or a Mitch screen, which is why the guy was like in the top percentile in drives. But shout out to Schwinny Poo over at the Strickland gave me this great stat right before RJ got traded. He was he's in the top 100 of total drives, and he was 6th in field goal percentage. And I think the biggest thing, because you said his percentage has gotten better on drives, his field goal percentage. We'll see how sustainable that is. He also at the time of the trade with those numbers had the lowest pass percentage out of drives. And I think the biggest thing is seeing the assists go up. And this is the version of RJ we saw at the beginning of the year. It's like, oh, if you're going to be a dual threat and actually see the guy on the wing, and that just went away after the migraines. And that's what I've at least noticed in the times I've watched the Raptors again on the second screen is that he's facilitating more. Is that a fair thing that I'm catching up
for
on?
sure?
Is that he's being a bit more of a dual threat that you have to honor the drive as well as the pass.
He's being asked to do it more. And I think that's an area where they want him to grow and evolve, especially in the pick and roll. Like the difference between him and OG is that RJ has a much better handle. Like he can dribble the ball a little bit better. I'm sure we'll get into that.
You don't say.
I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit. But like RJ's ball handling ability really helps this Raptors team because he can, like, let's say an advantage is created on one side of the floor, Scotty in a post up or whatever, and then they swing. There's a quick pick and roll action with RJ on the other side. And now empty side pick and roll, he can make that little pocket pass to the big rolling, or he can make the pass across the corner to hit the three. Like these are simple things, but they're also simple things that OG just was not capable of doing. And that adds a dynamic offensively to this Raptors team. So yeah, it's looked really good so far playmaking wise.
Well, I'm curious to see what version of RJ shows up at the Garden on Saturday night. I'm also curious. He mentioned something in a recent interview, like what reaction he's going to get. I expect it to be overwhelmingly positive. There's there's this thing that Knicks fans have of like the once a Knick, always a Knick.
Right.
And like we have all these guys that come back and sit courtside. I understand a lot was made of the Oakley of it all, but like Carmelo Anthony and Amari Stoudemire come to games all the time now and are heroes. You know, John Starks, Allen Houston, all these guys that won nothing for the Knicks, and they come back and are heroes. And I have to think RJ is going to fall in that category. One person I know is going to get a rousing ovation on Saturday night is Immanuel Quickley. And look, the goodbye letter he put in the Players Tribune, I had some tissues nearby while I was reading it. And it was a recognition of like why you fall in love with athletes and why you invest in them emotionally. And it's cool to see it reciprocated. I will say, outside of the 3-point shooting, just the stats in general have been underwhelming. I do like that his assist numbers are up, or at least I've noticed the assist numbers are up, and he's passing like he's being a point guard. Your assessment of Immanuel Quickley through the first 10 games?
They don't know how to use him yet, man. They do not know how to use him yet. That's my main analysis, and I've been harping on this multiple times. It's a 2-part thing. Okay. The first thing is I feel like he's being a little bit passive. And that goes to the playmaking and assist. Like I think he's actively trying to get players involved and be this sort of floor general. Him being thrusted into that role as a starting point guard has maybe taken away his aggression a little bit, because there are nights where he will get to the basket. There are nights where he is looking for a shot, but then nights like last night where he's not necessarily looking for a shot, not necessarily looking for it, but he's trying to get guys involved. And I think that's the learning curve he needs to have as a starting point guard. It's like figuring out how to, I guess, maintain or balance that level between scoring and aggression and playmaking. Cause like there are moments in transition where it's like, dude, pull up, take the shot. We need this. All good. Like go for it. This is a better shot than whatever else they could find in that opportunity. And so like, I just want him to let it fly a little bit more offensively. I think that's the thing that's holding him back from those staggering numbers. Now he's had some really good games and some really explosive games. You see like stretches where he'll score like 10, 15 unanswered. And you're like, whoa, where did this, right. So you want that to sort of build into something consistent where he is making plays, but also is looking for his shots. And that eventually in the next couple of years will mold into him being like a really good starting point guard. But it's balancing that thing right now that is most important to me. Let it fly, man. Like that's the main thing. And the Raptors also, I think, need to find ways to maximize him off ball a little bit more. They are doing some like flex actions that have him popping out, to the 3-point line, or some like little like elevator screen type stuff to get him popping out above the break to shoot. But for the most part, it feels like some of that. I'm going to liken it to like his favorite player. Quick's favorite player is Steph, right?
Mm-hmm.
The little ingenuity between Steph and Draymond is like they'll have their own 2-man game where, he'll pitch it to Draymond. Draymond will pitch it back to him. Steph is constantly in movement. They're like playing this little chess game with each other to avoid the defender. And then Steph takes this ridiculous shot and makes it, right? Quick and Scottie need to develop that type of chemistry on the floor together. They do not have that chemistry on the floor together right now. They need to figure that out. And that's going to be like a long-term process, not just this season, but next too, and in the future,
Well, what I got to say is some of the lineups that I've noticed have been really successful. And I just went to clean the glass to make sure that eye test and data match. And it does confirm it. In 278 possessions of Schroeder and Quickley together, it's a plus 5.2 and the 95th percentile in offense, 124 points. So like this is the lineup that worked the best in New York was Jalen Brunson, Immanuel Quickley. That's not to say he can't be the point guard of the future, but it's almost like if you have an overqualified ball handler at the 2 in Quickley with the wingspan, like you said, he has the ability to play off ball as well. So I wonder if that also means not that they're in the market for a point guard of the future, but that the backup point guard will still be essential in Toronto,
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I actually think a big reason that Schroeder and IQ lineup does well is because they're so good defensively too. Like they're both hounds at the point of attack. Like they're just hounding guys, and IQ and Schroeder, they have like this little 2-man game that works defensively where they're kind of communicating what the reads and coverages are. And so that helps on that end. Offensively, like having another ball handler is going to help in those scenarios. And like you said, him excelling off ball. It's just about finding ways to maximize a guy like Quick because he can be so deadly off ball. And sometimes it's harder to incorporate off-ball players than it is a guy who you can just throw the ball to and say, make it happen,
Speaking of Dennis Schroeder, your best guess, is he on the team on February 9th?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of talk recently about this. I feel like it's like there's no way they trade him because
really,
yeah, he is Darko's beloved child. Like they obviously have a very deep connection from OKC, and he was the reason he signed here in the first place. I would be very surprised unless they are like blown away with an offer for them to trade Dennis Schroeder. And he's been really good. Like I think since coming off of the bench, he's been one of the best bench players in the league. It's only been like a month now, but he's been really, really excellent. So yeah, I think he stays, to be honest with you. I would look more to maybe Gary Trent Jr., maybe Chris Boucher, maybe Jakob Poeltl. That's another thing where it's like maybe there's a world in which that happens. And obviously like the Bruce Brown situation, we'll see, which by the way, Knicks fans, how you doing? What's going on? I saw Quentin Grimes did not do so well. It wasn't too hot the other night. Maybe,
my goodness,
little scratch each other's back type of thing. Huh?
So, for a little behind the scenes. So, you know how the OG trade happened, the OG Quickley RJ trade happened when I was at the movies.
Yeah.
So I went to the city, New York City on Wednesday, and I went to like one of these limited screens. I saw The Zone of Interest. It's a very high caliber Oscar movie, right?
Okay.
And I text the Knicks Film School group chat like, hey, like I know that the last time I went to the movies, the world collapsed and we needed to jump into emergency mode. Please text me if something happens. And like I'm not going on airplane mode this time. I'm going on Do Not Disturb. And I got nothing. When I tell you, maybe minutes after I sent that text, the Pascal trade happened. And I was like, where was the text? He said, it didn't involve the Knicks. And I was like, okay, fair. Like it did happen though. And there was a split second during the day, and maybe a couple hours it became, where we thought Obi was going to be in that trade.
Right. Yeah.
And then you would have had those three. And then to your point about Bruce Brown, if it's like, well, Quentin Grimes, Evan Fournier for Bruce Brown, and then you just have like 6 film school up north where you have these Knicks that are just going to be watched, the Raptors that are just going to be watched
Toronto
by
Knicks. Yeah, essentially. Yeah.
It's like when Adam Silver looks at the league pass ratings, it's like there's a spike in New York for all Raptors games for some reason. And
helping out the smaller markets.
Exactly. That's how it works. So for some reason, Indiana's getting a ton of play in New York. And, who knows where Quentin Grimes ends up. Just your personal opinion, like the Knicks have Josh Hart. Do they need Bruce Brown?
So Bruce Brown is a little different than Josh Hart, in my opinion. I think he is a little bit more of a ball handler. Like he can make some plays for you. He is I think in a similar way to Josh Hart, he's an excellent cutter, great off-ball guy, great rebounder for his size, can play multiple positions. Like all those things that Josh Hart can do, he can do as well. But you add an extra ball handler in Bruce Brown. Now, to be fair, it's not the scoring ball handler you guys sort of want. I know like there's conversations about Jordan Clarkson. There was that report today or yesterday about Jordan Clarkson being involved. But I think Bruce would actually be better because of how good of a defender he is. And like point of attack, the Knicks would literally not have, maybe they not one bad defender, but like they would be so stout 1 through 8 defensively or 1 through 9 defensively that I think it's worth investing in a guy who might not be as good offensively as you'd want, but can help you as this like defensive minded guy, Swiss Army knife on offense, and can be thrown into lineups with Josh Hart and Donte DiVincenzo, can be thrown into lineups with the starters and close if you want to in certain scenarios. I just think there's so much flexibility to adding a guy like Bruce Brown. I'm not going to say he's like the missing piece to a championship, but he might be like, let's say second round, you're playing the Celtics or you're playing the Sixers and like OG is doing great. Maybe Randall isn't having the best of series and like a Bruce Brown game steals you game 3. You know what I mean? Like that's the type of guy that Bruce Brown is. He showed that last year in Denver. I think he could be a really important piece for the Knicks if they get him.
So here's the counter that I have.
Yeah, go for it.
You mentioned that they wouldn't have a weak link on defense. Well, since the trade, they're second in defense. So I actually think the defense has somewhat been fixed. They have a starting 5 right now with an Unreal. Now, again, it's 10 games. Their schedule has been somewhat soft, so I'm not overreacting to it too much. But the last 2 postseasons featuring Tom Thibodeau's Knicks, they've been fine defensively. It's the offense that has just fallen off a cliff. Now, some of that is Julius Randle. Some of that is just the style the Knicks play. It's very hard to score points in the half court. And what they've lost in this trade is just so much creation. And while I think Bruce Brown could absolutely contribute and maybe, like you said, a Bruce Brown game might happen, I don't foresee like, Randall only played 20 minutes in a playoff game. That's just like, and this is like the issue sometimes I have with Tibbs where it's like, read the room. Randall doesn't have it. You can play like other players at the moment. I think like in those Josh Hart, Donte DiVincenzo lineups, I'd want OG to be the 4 in that stretch. Right. And it's why I think an actual point guard, like Deuce McBride can take Quentin Grimes' minutes when this whatever trade happens. Right. I think an actual guard is more where the Knicks are. And I think an actual
what if you did both?
The rotation.
I mean, I think New York might be.
Who's the guard?
So no, like separate trades, right? Okay. You do the Evan Fournier, Quentin Grimes, Bruce Brown thing, and then another trade for another guard or something along the lines of that. I don't know where I have to check the salary books because I don't know what what you could kind of cobble up to go out and get someone else. But
what is Bruce Brown making this year?
22.
Oh, that's Fournier plus Grimes.
It's like perfect. It's like a perfect salary match. It wouldn't even. Yeah.
I would rather personally, and this is not a knock on Bruce Brown. The Knicks have no spacing on the second unit, and honestly, the spacing at the moment is kind of right. And to go and trade for a Bruce Brown who would, he'd be a backup, but like Malcolm Brogdon continues to be the name that I'm staring at. That's like, that's the perfect. Like, right. You're replacing the the guy that finished second in Sixth Man of the Year with the Sixth Man of the Year. Like that's the actual name I go to. I don't want to trade Quentin Grimes for him. There's writing on the wall that Quentin Grimes will be gone at the deadline no matter what, and I don't agree with it, but I am learning to understand it.
It seems like it's
at
run
least
its
I
course.
can understand. It's not even so. Yes, it's run its course, but it's the process to the course that I'm very frustrated with. That apparently it's like because he was hurt in the playoffs last year, Tibbs held that against him, which is why DiVincenzo was signed, which is why DiVincenzo became the starter. It's why Quentin Grimes speaking up, and it's just like Grimes hasn't helped at all. But even when he's played well since the trade, he's getting 15, 16-minute stretches. And Josh Hart played poorly, and the Knicks offense suffered. And Grimes was still seeing 16 minutes a game. And I don't blame him for being like, you're not going to play me. Why would I? At a certain point, you have to consider the human involved here. And that's why I'm frustrated by the process of it all. Having said that, I think getting Bruce Brown can, in my opinion, be a bit more redundant in what the Knicks currently need. And
Fair
it's
enough.
like they need a creator. And it's why Malcolm Brogdon just makes too much sense for this team right now.
Tyus Jones, man. I keep coming back to Tyus Jones.
Him too. 14 assists last night against the Knicks. I think and this is the complicated part about the Knicks right now, is they're like trying to have their cake and eat it too.
Right.
And it's like, we need to get a point guard, but he also has to be under contract for next year. Because we want to go get Joel Embiid or Donovan Mitchell or whomever this summer. So we need the salary that we would have had if we had Fournier. So that's at least where the Knicks needs are. And this is a good transition into how the Knicks have played since said trade of OG Anunoby. So we talked about my experience on the second screen. How has your experience been? The Knicks are 8-2, as I mentioned. Like all these complaints I have about Tibbs, and it's like it's window dressing. They're 8-2. They have the second best net rating, second best defense in the league since the trade. They're the ceiling I will project if they get Malcolm Brogdon is very high.
Yeah.
What about you? Where do you stand on what you've seen from the Knicks since the OG trade?
I just think there's so much more of a ready playoff team. And they were a good playoff team last year. I mean, they got to the second round, gave the Heat a good fight, but they would have a much better fight now with OG against the Miami Heat. They just have a solution to guard a Jimmy Butler, a solution to guard a Jason Tatum if it comes to it. Hey, a solution to guard Joel Embiid at times if it comes to it. The Swiss Army knife that OG is on defense to be, and I'm sure you've seen it over the last 10 days, the ability to just shut down the opposing best player, that is a unique marvel unto his own. He can do that, and then knocking down the corner threes, the cutting off of the ball, the movement shooting and things like that he can also try to, tap into. Those are all things that I think were so important to what New York needed from that 3-and-D position, that wing position that was so especially next to Brunson and Randall. It's it seems like he's feasting off of advantages that those guys create. And first of all, happy for OG. Seems like he's thriving. Not one to talk much. I know yesterday, I think one of the Knicks reporters was asking about his return going up against the Raptors. And he's like, yeah, it's going to be fun. I hope we can win. And it's that's very typical OG Anunoby. But when it comes to everything he does for the team, I think he just a glue guy, but if glue was Gorilla Glue, if it was that nice, the have you seen the meme of the guy with the tape and the water and he smacks the thing and it shuts the water from leaking? That's
flex seal.
Flex tape. Exactly. That's what OG Anunoby is for this Knicks team, where he's plugging holes on defense. He's being this solution for them on offense when teams are loading up on Randall and Brunson. It completes them in a really good way. And it also helps that I think at the same time, in tandem with that, Isaiah Hartenstein is balling his ass off. He is absolutely dominating on the defensive glass. He's getting it after it defensively as well. The pick and roll stuff between him and OG in terms of the defense, exceptional. And so you're not even feeling the loss of Mitch Robinson as much as you would, if you didn't have a guy like Hartenstein. So I think those two things in tandem have really helped the Knicks over the last 10 or whatever games.
So I agree with 99.9% of what you said.
What's the 0.1? Let's hear it.
The way they're feeling the loss of Mitchell Robinson is the Precious Achiuwa minutes. My goodness, were you right about this, sir? Sometimes you're told that there's a cliff ahead of you, and you say, "No, like I see a bridge. I see road up ahead." And my goodness, like there's been spurts of like, "Oh, I see why teams take chances on him." It just there was a moment last night in the Wizards game where I'm just watching and he's like not fighting for rebounds, and that's like Jordan Poole getting an uncontested rebound. Man, like I could see why Tibbs didn't play him in the second half, and there's been a couple times where he hasn't played him in second halves, and it's led to these minutes for Hartenstein, for OG, and I think he's sending a clear message to the front office, like I'm not playing these non-NBA players that you're sending me, or at least non-rotation players that you're sending me. Your perspective of seeing OG, like as I mentioned, you're seeing him on a second screen, and any amount that you miss him, you get to see a ton of him because he's always on the court for the Knicks.
Right.
Like your thoughts or your perspective on seeing the Knicks minutes load specifically for OG since the trade.
Go look at his minutes load under Nick Nurse.
This is literally what Tibbs said last night. I knew he could do it because he played in Toronto last year.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a time last year where Nick Nurse's nickname was Nick Tibbs because he would do the same thing. And so, this is something he's used to, man. This is just something OG is used to. And like, maybe it leads to some injuries here and there for him. I'm not sure. I don't think it did in the time in Toronto for him. Like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's like, or a couple of podcasts ago, a lot of his injuries were just like fluke fake injuries that he had. And I don't think that would happen with just like increasing a minutes load. So I wouldn't worry. I honestly wouldn't worry about that. I think that's just something that he is incredibly used to. The one thing I would say is like, I would keep an eye on the 3-point shooting once the minute load goes up, because like you just don't have your legs under you late in games for those situations. Now, to be fair, he's well prepared for that because he's been doing it for a really long time. But that's the one thing I guess I would keep an eye on.
Yeah, honestly, the way you were talking about getting RJ going downhill as a cutter, that's just how they've used OG in the starting five. And the symmetry and the synergy that they're developing in the starting five it's why it's weird. Like the DeJounte Murray rumors are out there, and there's always going to be a Donovan Mitchell question. Donte DiVincenzo is shooting like close to 50% since going to the starting five from 3-point range. It's gone down the last couple of games, but my goodness, I just don't want to break up something that's working. Yeah. And it's why I think they'll go backup point guard as far as a move that is made. And then you go to Saturday night when the Knicks play the Raptors, and it's OG against RJ and Quick. The Raptors have actually played,
and the Quentin Grimes trade will happen.
And obviously that's where they'll consummate it. It'll be at a hotel.
Hey, the Knicks OG trade happened when they were here, right?
When they were in Toronto, exactly. I've been doing that every time they go play. Like they just played the Blazers. Hey, come on over to our suite. We'll talk about Malcolm Brogdon. They played the Wizards twice. What would it take to get Tyus Jones? I've figured that all these conversations are happening. What are you expecting from this matchup as far as this game is concerned? Like the Knicks are coming in on fumes. Josh Hart didn't play against the Wizards. So as far as the game goes, I think the Raptors have a very good chance of winning it. But going in, like what are Raptors fans expecting in the first game against OG?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see who OG guards. I'm pretty sure it'll be Scotty, and those guys are really close friends. Even yesterday, like Scotty was asking, and like Scotty's a pretty shy and timid guy when it comes to the media. Like he's not answering a lot of questions and whatnot. Like he's not giving the most thorough answers. But when it came to OG, he just like his smile lit up, and he was like talking and like just being excited about playing against OG. So I think that's probably what Raptors fans are looking forward to most. If you're looking from a Raptors fan perspective, they probably expect a loss because this is just the way it works against former Raptors turned, different teams. Like they play Pascal Siakam on Valentine's Day in Indiana, and I guarantee you they think that Pascal is going to drop like 50 on them. So I think it's just like they're waiting for a revenge game from OG type of thing. on the other side, maybe there's a revenge game from RJ and Quick. So I don't know. I really don't know. I know there's going to be a lot of emotions from both sides because, Quick and RJ, they were obviously fan favorites in New York. And then OG was a massive fan favorite in Toronto. So just going to be a lot of emotions on Saturday.
You think they'll put Scotty on Randall?
Yeah, they've been putting him on bigs more often since the OG trade. So I would say yes. I would probably wager yes. And then you have like Quick on Brunson. And probably like RJ, maybe RJ on OG or whatever. But yeah.
So I asked that because I was wondering if we get Randall on RJ minutes, and you have. I mean, that was the redundant piece that a lot of Knicks fans were like, trade Randall, keep RJ. Like that was a conversation in New York that did exist. Randall did not do the greatest in his first matchup against Obi when they played the Pacers. Granted, that was the day of the Knicks Raptors trade, so I think things were going on for Julius Randle that day. But look, I'm sure you feel the exact same way. It's just going to feel weird to look at someone in a different uniform in this building on Saturday night. And I'm sure it'll be the same whenever the Knicks go up to Toronto next. I believe they still play each other one more time.
I think so.
This season, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You know what's weird? You mentioned the Randall and Barrett thing. I actually think RJ is benefiting a lot from being the only left-handed player on the roster. It's crazy to say. It's like a weird thing to mention, right? Because you're like, what? Like, of course, that doesn't make any sense. They play on both sides of the ball, but RJ is so left-hand dominant and like he loves driving left that the lane is a little bit more open to him because, hey, Brunson likes driving left. Randall likes driving left. Like this is like a thing, and they like using their left hand dominantly too. It's like you are so heavy on that side of the floor that maybe being the only left-handed guy is actually benefiting RJ. I don't know. It's just a theory I have, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing with Isaiah Hartenstein going into the starting five. It's like, there are 4 lefties in the starting five at the moment. The Knicks have a thing. It's particular to CAA and Kentucky and Villanova and lefty-handed basketball players.
Right.
It's why when James Harden was available this offseason,
might as well. Yeah.
I was like, I can't do another high usage lefty. I just cannot do it.
They would all just be on one side of the floor.
It's just going to be a NASCAR race. Everybody's going left. Like, what is going on? Last thing, and this is more funny than anything else, but the reaction by you and Raptors fans when you saw Evil Donte trending.
Right. Yeah, that was funny. That was really fun. It's because he has gotten a teammate adjacent nickname pretty much everywhere he's gone. He was called Red Van Vliet here in Toronto for a little bit.
That's amazing, by the way.
It is good. I won't lie. And Evil Donte is good too. Like Evil Donte is great. I just think how is he doing, by the way? How is Malachi so far?
So he's only really gotten run in 2 games. He got the backup point guard minutes for Deuce McBride against Memphis on Saturday. I actually thought he did really well, and it was a point of not contention, but like of question after the game. He played a really good first half, and then Tibbs played Deuce and Hartenstein the entire second half. I was like, I didn't think he deserved to be benched for the second half.
Yeah.
Then against Orlando, he was less good, and you saw kind of why. And this is the empathy I have for Tibbs in the situation. These minutes have been insane, right? And he's playing these guys a ton, like playoff rotations. Monday, no Jalen Brunson. They're playing Orlando. I actually thought he let the leash go a little bit and was like, all right, I'm going to put these lineups out there. You could question the different actual lineups he chose, but like we saw Precious go back in the second half. We saw Malachi go out in the second half, and like a struggling Josh Hart played a ton, and Orlando got back in the game, and like a struggling Julius Randle even had to got some rest because of his ankle. And like I empathize that Tibbs doesn't have guys he trusts, which once he tries to widen the circle, it's like, oh, we lost. Okay, I can't have that. So I'm going to go back to this 4-man rotation, and maybe a 5th person is allowed in. So all this to say, I don't think Malachi Flynn is going to factor into the long term. I honestly think they might flip him in a 1-for-1 because obviously he can't be aggregated in any potential deal they're about to make. But the shout out to really talented graphic designer on Knicks Twitter, Knicks Homer. who came up, who literally during the Minnesota game, that first game on New Year's Day, was like, Malachi looks like evil Donte, and it had me like rolling for an entire quarter of that game, and it's just caught on since then. So,
oh, that's so good. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure for all of us on Saturday, it'll be, as we've said throughout this pod, an emotional night. Hopefully, it's also a competitive basketball game. And we'll see what happens in RJ Barrett and Immanuel Quickley's first trip back to MSG as visitors, and in OG Anunoby and Malachi Flynn and Precious Achiuwa's first game against the Toronto Raptors. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend. I look forward to you coming back whenever the Knicks and Raptors make another trade, which might be,
which clearly might happen. Yeah, I mean, it might be right after the game. Who knows? Just be like, man, Bruce, stay here. You know,
if we're linking up on Sunday because hey, they made another trade, you want to come on the pod? We can. By the way, the Knicks go to Toronto on March 27th.
There you go.
So we'll obviously link up and talk about OG's first trip back to Toronto. And I'll get an update on how RJ Barrett's doing. I'm very curious to see what his numbers look like.
A month and a half, a couple
larger sample size. We'll see.
Larger sample size. We'll see.
Yeah. Before you get out of here, tell people where they can find you on the internet.
At just Baraheni on Twitter. I do writing Raptors stuff for Forbes. You'll see me around doing other things as well throughout the year. But appreciate you for having me on, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. Knicks fans, a must follow for all of your old favorite Knicks content, especially if they're about to trade for Quentin Grimes. I was rooting for Obi to go there. I mean it. We were going to be like, do you want to come on and just host Six Film School? Like, it's the best name I saw for like the Toronto branch of Knicks coverage.
Oh my God.
As always, thank you for joining me.
Of course. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.